Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the 15 most evolutionary composers of all time. The composers who really advanced the universe of music as we know it. And oh my, there are really quite a few of them. Believe it or not, yes. So are you ready? Here we go. Oh, this is just fun list. You're going to love this one, and you'll have, of course, some of your own. And I don't mean, I say evolutionary, great composers. Again, we're not talking about who did something first. We're talking about who did it best. That's the idea here. So let's not find some obscure weirdo who may have done something like, kind of alarming in their lifetime that other people did later. It's got to be great composer, great music, great stuff, totally fabulous, right? Beethoven. Obviously Beethoven. I mean, Beethoven is the iconic evolutionary composer, the guy who had three periods, the three main periods, and whose music became, progressed from faux Mozart to faux Haydn, which is why he was so progressive. Now, I mean, it went completely bonkers in his last period. A really fascinating guy. And you can listen to the advance from one work to the next. It's really, really astonishing how much he achieved in a relatively short period of time. Mahler, these are in no particular order, by the way, just so you know. Mahler was really, really cool. Mahler fascinates because his style, he again started fairly conservatively with his like piano quartet and things like that, and the incidental music to the trumpeter von Sackingen, all of which that's left is the Blumina movement that's in the First Symphony. Rather conventional and attractive, but wow, after the First Symphony, my goodness, everything took off, didn't it? It actually took off with the First Symphony in its final version, and every single work is a totally separate, unique thing that advances the cause of symphonic music. Really, really kind of remarkable. His thing was expanding the notion of what the symphony could be, using all kinds of interesting musical ideas from all kinds of different places, found objects, cheap, vulgar things, changing the aesthetics of what symphonic music people thought symphonic music should be. In Das Lied von der Erde, creating the Song Symphony, which was enormously influential in future works of the 20th century by Zemlinsky and Britten and all kinds of people. Really fascinating considering that he did this in the span of about 20 years and over the course of 10-ish works. I mean, that's really something else. Schubert, frankly, had Schubert lived, there would have been no need for any other music ever, probably. I mean, he was advancing that quickly, beginning with, in the style of Haydn and Mozart, particularly Mozart, this classical derivative style. He invented essentially the German art song, or was its greatest exponent at the time. He crossed the boundary from the classical period to the Romantic period. He wrote in his Ninth Symphony, The Unfinished, two of the great proto-Romantic or culminating classical works. And then he dropped dead of syphilis at the age of 31? Something like that? Wow. He was moving. He was going like gangbusters. He really was. C.P.E. Bach, a fascinating name in the history of music. He began life working with Dad, as the two of them invented the keyboard concerto basically together. And then he wound up making a living as a professional composer, publishing his own music, and taking music from the Baroque period through the Rococo and Galant era and into the classical period, the high classical period. An extraordinary legacy. It's not much understood or even respected because the period in which he worked was transitional. And so you can't say that C.P.E. Bach was the height of something or other. He wasn't. He was in motion throughout his whole life, and in motion from the epitome of the Baroque, his dad Bach, to what would later become the high classical style in Vienna, and he was in Berlin. He had a different aesthetic going than the Viennese people. It wasn't based on comic opera. It wasn't all humor. It wasn't any of those things. And so his style was harder to pigeonhole, but he was no less evolutionary and open to new things and trying to do new things throughout his life. The whole emotional, the Empfindungsstil and all of that stuff, really fabulous. Stravinsky. Do I have to talk about Stravinsky? I mean, really, right? I mean, the Rite of Spring was the emancipation of rhythm. It was the new everything. It was totally fabulously cool. And then he went neoclassical, and then he went 12-tone. Stravinsky was constantly concerned with staying at the forefront of musical developments. I mean, it really mattered to him. It mattered to him a lot. Right, Finster? Right, Sean?
Right.
See? Don't you agree? And so there you go. After Stravinsky, his buddy, Schoenberg. They were neighbors in Los Angeles. Schoenberg, of course, started in a late Romantic, Brahmsian, Wagnerian vein and wound up being Schoenberg, doing dodecaphony and 12-note stuff and tonal stuff as well. Everything Schoenberg wrote is difficult. All of it. And he never repeated himself. He was an extraordinary composer in that respect. And whether you love him or hate him, you got to respect him. You have to respect him. He was so determined not to be predictable and to stay ahead of musical developments, musical evolution. Really astonishing, brilliant guy. Monteverdi. Let's go way back a few hundred years. Monteverdi started life as an Italian madrigalist, and when he left, he was part of the new Baroque period, where you had monody, that is simple melodic lines with continuo accompaniment, or instrumental accompaniment. So that was quite a thing. It's quite a deal when you think about it. He started out as a Renaissance sort of a cappella guy and wound up writing operas, and one of the first ever operas. He was a major musical evolutionary. Absolutely. Charles Ives, of course, Charles Ives. He's got to be on any list, doesn't he? He started out as a not terribly interesting, sort of conservative German composer guy who was taught by Horatio Parker at Yale. But thanks to his dad and his own cantankerous disposition, he became a wild avant-gardist before the wild avant-garde even existed. So, I mean, that was really something. He was really, really an amazing character. Mozart. Yes, Mozart. Remember, he started when he was 3. Or whatever, and so he started his first symphony when he was 5, and then by the time he left music, the Romantic era was dawning, and he was only 35, which is even more astounding. Wow, baby! So he obviously helped push music along its desired path, or its soon-to-be desired path, and became the model for so many composers who succeeded him. None of whom were as good as he was, obviously. The original was always best. Let's not kid ourselves. Verdi. Verdi was an amazing composer. Verdi said, I may not be a learned composer, but I am a very experienced one. And that experience really told, because he took Italian music where Donizetti and Bellini and those folks left it, in the bel canto realm, and slowly, gradually refined it into music drama. And I don't mean that in the Wagnerian sense. I mean it in the Verdian sense. It was his own vision of what music drama ought to be, based more on the French models. Actually, Wagner was based more on the French models as well. But what Verdi did was wholly within the Italian tradition, which he refined and developed and elevated beyond all reckoning, especially in the Requiem, Otello, Aida, and Falstaff. Really an amazing composer. Fortunately, he had a long enough life that he was able to achieve all of that. Debussy, one of the great musical revolutionaries. I mean, he began life as sort of a post-Massenet, very pleasant, enjoyable Frenchy person. Then he went to Russia as the assistant of, as a pianist to Tchaikovsky's patroness, Madame von Meck, believe it or not. And then he wound up, encountering Far Eastern music, and all of these influences he amalgamated into what we call Impressionism, which was only a part of his style. In works like, the Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun and the Nocturnes in La Mer, the piano preludes and things. Oh, my goodness. It was an entirely new musical vocabulary. It really was. And he surpassed even that in his late works, the etudes and the late sonatas, where his style was undergoing a really radical revision with harder, cleaner outlines and more acerbic harmony. He was an extraordinary musician. Remember, he only lived also to his 50s before he died of cancer. So who knows where he would have wound up. He was heading there. Then, of course, Wagner. Wagner began as a trashy German composer and ended his life as a trashy Wagnerian German composer. He was obviously a musical genius and a composer of extraordinary gifts. And his style was like Verdi's, continually being refined as he aged, as he moved from one work to the next. There have been more books written about Wagner than any character in Western civilization other than Jesus. That's a fact, by the way. I read that somewhere, which tells you just how significant he thought he was. And others tended to agree. But after Wagner, I actually think even more fascinating is Liszt. Liszt was really, really cool. Liszt was an amazing composer. When you consider where he started, he started out as, a kid who knew Beethoven, briefly. And then I don't understand where his style really came from. Hanging out with gypsies or whatever it was, being Wagner's son-in-law, he was a radical to the manner born, and an improviser, a composer who was just open to absolutely everything, and who wanted to try out every possible new idea, and who believed in the ultimate virtuoso technique and wrote accordingly, and whose style went from sort of a somewhat superficial glitziness to incredible austerity and harmonic daring. Really a fascinating character. I don't think we'll ever quite wrap our brains around him wholly. I really doubt. However, who do you think comes in last but not least? But first, Haydn. Haydn invented Western music as we know it. If it hadn't been for Haydn, there would have been no Mozart, no Beethoven, no Liszt, no Wagner, no nobody. And that's a fact. He was unbelievable. We took music as a sort of, what he founded as a sort of jolly rococo or gallant entertainment, and left it with the symphony and the string quartet and the great forms of instrumental music, the great forms of musical construction, the sonata forms. All of this Haydn gave us. Really, really an amazing, amazing career. And he was evolving right up to his last work, right up to the Opus 77 string quartets, where we see him going even beyond the sonata style, which he really deserves credit for inventing. So he was sui generis. I mean, just an unbelievable, forward-thinking musical genius. And there's that fabulous quotation from his biography where he says, "Oh my God, how much there remains to be achieved in this wonderful art, even by such a man as I have been." He always knew that he was not the end. There was a future, and that future was going to be glorious. He saw it all. Wow. So there you have it. The 15 most revolutionary great composers of all time. Keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.